Morning, Don. I was wondering if you'd be willing to share your experiences and your recollections about when AABA was in its earlier days. Anything stand out for you?
Well, there are very few Asian American attorneys, and so we're old now, but we were among the first of a wave of Asian American lawyers to integrate the bar, put it that way. And so it was a problem because law firms weren't hiring Asian American attorneys, and not in any great numbers. And when Asian American lawyers, the few of us, made court appearances, the judges would think maybe we're the defendants rather than the lawyers, and therefore on the wrong side of that gate separating the audience from the bench. And so it was uphill battle. So the Asian American Bar Association was literally 2 or 3 tables at a Chinese restaurant. We're talking 20 or 30 people. And so it's quite remarkable how far AABA has come. I'm completely impressed. But I think looking back, there was a reason for AABA to form. And I don't know that if you've talked to Dale about this and some of his experiences, but he's related that, for example, he was making an appearance in court. He was walking back behind chambers, and down the hall, he could hear the judge holding court in his chambers with 2 other lawyers, and they were making racial jokes. They were using the N-word, you know, and laughing about that. And then Dale enters the threshold of the door, and they suddenly climb up. And then because they realized they were heard, this embarrassment, and then they said, well, not only are there a lot of N people in the audience, but a lot of chinks too. And everybody laughed. Only Dale felt nothing was funny about that. And my partner, Dale Manami, realized that this culture had to change. And how do you change the culture? Well, one way you can is to get involved in judicial appointments and the political process. And once that this band of Asian American attorneys was successful in getting Ken Kawaguchi appointed through Governor Brown, the first Asian American judge in Alameda County, then people stood up. And when we made appearances, some of the judges began connecting the dots that we were not to be looked down upon like that. And so the thinking was that Asian Americans really needed to band together to further their own interests in an environment that was not all that friendly. And so that, in my recollection, that was really the beginnings of the Asian American Bar Association. Now, there are other reasons for people to get together in AABA, you know, fun, culture, entertainment, networking, advancing careers. But at the heart of it, at that time, was civil rights. And Asian Americans entered the profession now thinking this was the way it always was, and it was not. It was not. And so, of course, the glass ceiling still remains. Me Too movement is a reason for that going on. There's still discrimination in profession. I'm still very concerned that Asian American lawyers are not partners at the highest levels, and in business, Asian American achievement tends to be in companies that they founded themselves, you know, rather than so the playing field is not level, but it's much better than it was some 40 or more years ago. And so that was the beginnings of AABA. The direction in which it's going now, I'm completely impressed. I would urge AABA to remain involved in the political process, and also not in the partisanship sense, but in the sense of whether it's Republican or Democrat, getting involved in judicial appointments, continuing to open the door for others, to be a door opener. I would also urge them that we didn't get here on our own. We'd like to think that we've achieved at a very high level, so we're entitled to reach the highest levels of the profession. But if it wasn't for Martin Luther King, I wouldn't be a lawyer. And if it wasn't for the Black Civil Rights Movement, women, Asian Americans, disabled, the LGBTQ community, I mean, we would not have made the progress that we have. So don't be in the camp that says, now I've achieved, pull up the ladder. I think we have to be door openers, I would say that. And I think that's a real moral responsibility. So AABA is playing that role. I'm proud of that, AABA, for that reason. I'm glad to be a part of it. But it's important to remember how things were too.
When the organization formed, it could have taken a different direction, and in fact, in other cities, rather than forming first a Pan-Asian organization, in Los Angeles, for example, the first to form, I believe, was the Southern California Chinese Lawyers Association, and then I'm sure I'll get the sequence wrong, but the Japanese American Bar Association, the Korean American Bar Association, the Philippine American Bar Association, the same with Vietnamese and Thai and so on. And so the Pan-Asian organization didn't form until decades later. In the Bay Area, we could have also followed that path, but instead the AABA as a sort of an umbrella group formed first. Can you explain why that was and why that was important?
That's a really interesting question, because I've often thought of that, and I was not one of the principal organizers of AABA, but it was my privilege and honor to be there at that time, put it that way. And Dale Manami, Michael Lee, Hoyt Zia, and others recognized that our problem of being the first to integrate the bar at all levels, and not only in the law firms, in government, in the courts, on the bench, etc., was not a Filipino problem or a Japanese problem or a Korean problem or a Chinese problem. It was because we're Asian American, period, and a member of a minority that had been excluded. And like I said, I'm literally a few years from the point of being locked up myself. Had I been born a little bit earlier, I would have wound up in an American-style concentration camp in Utah, like my parents. And so we're now want to be full participants in the community. We want to be lawyers. We want to be involved in making a difference for ourselves and for the public. And so that was a political decision, to be honest with you, not in a partisan Republican Democratic sense, but a political decision in how racism operates. If someone had said, well, Japanese Americans are okay, but Chinese no, then it might have been different. But you had some very politically savvy people, like Dale Manami among them, that had just formed he had just helped found the Asian Law Caucus, was involved in some of the first employment discrimination cases ever brought by Asian Americans. So we certainly felt, we didn't identify as Japanese Americans as much as Asian American, because we all felt politically, in terms of equality, we were all in the same boat. So it just made sense to join together rather than to balkanize and weaken ourselves. So from the very beginning, we didn't come together for culture or language or national origin reasons. It was to gain political power, to change the landscape. And then the entertainment part and the networking and the culture part followed on. But first and foremost was politically, this is our predicament, so we need to organize that way. And you gain more mass and numbers by coming together as Asian Americans rather than separating into the various ethnic groups. So that was my understanding of the history of the organization.
And for you personally, what has the organization meant?
Well, I think, look at the Bar Association of San Francisco now. You have 6 or 7 members who are Asian American on the Bar Association. The state court bench, there were no Asian American lawyers on the bench. And look how many you have now. Federal judiciary still needs to go a long way to be more integrated. But when we entered the profession, it was pretty much all white male. But everything was white male. You know, we turn on the TV to watch the news. And when we were entering the profession, the only people you would see was white newscasters, white news anchors. Now it's very diverse, very integrated. And so all of that is the result of people asserting themselves. And AABA played a role in that. I think the advancement of Asian Americans in the bench and the bar is a direct result of AABA. And it should be proud of that. It's of course it's a career advancement, it's a networking, it's a fun place to meet friends, etc. But it's been a change agent in the Bay Area, I have to say. And it continues to do that. So it's played a very key role in that, and I think its trajectory now is really on the right path. Of course, you know, it's a situation where it's good to have one foot in the past and one foot in the future. And Asian American Bar Association understands its history and what prompted its creation, but then it has one foot in the future as to the next steps, so that ultimately the goal is true equality and true change in culture. And that's how real change happens. So I think AABA's on the right track.
We're filming this in 2018. The organization was founded in 1976. This is our 42nd year. We're 4+ decades old. For the next generation, looking ahead 40 more years, what would you like to see AABA achieve in that time?
Well, I wish we were at a point where race didn't matter, but race still does matter. Not to the degree that when I was a child growing up, where everything was segregated, and it was actually, in most cases, legal to be segregated, and racism was de facto de jure permissible, you know. So of course that's changed, but race still matters. So just on that score, AABA remains relevant. Going forward, projecting the next 10, 20 years or more, I think the next step is for Asian Americans to play a more leading role in society. And I'm so happy to see the number of Asian American attorneys in, for example, the Bar Association of San Francisco. And I do believe that lawyers are the protectors of the rule of law. I mean, they are, they protect the Constitution, they protect our fundamental freedoms, they play such a huge role in the public life and in this democracy. So I think the next step forward is basically Asian Americans continuing to play a role in that. I don't want to see Asian American attorneys just become an Asian version of what white attorneys have been. That's not what I think the American culture should be. And you know, when we started, we were, quote, minorities. We still are. But the difference is in California, there's not a single ethnic group that constitutes a majority in California. I mean, this is a unique moment in history. And where California is at is where the rest of the country is going. And we're seeing the tensions and dislocation and insecurity and fear that's creating in the rest of the country. So I think Asian Americans can play a role in that, in smoothing that process as the country transitions and also preserves its democracy and make sure that the worst aspects of American history involving Asian Americans and other groups are not to repeat it. So it's moved from 40 years ago from an infancy to almost not relevant first step in actually beginning to impact the local region, and then ultimately I'm looking for it to impact society. And it's doing that. I mean, it's producing legislators and political leaders and thought leaders and influencers. And so I think that would be a good trajectory for AABA.
AABA today has well over 1,000 members, and they range from law students to young attorneys to people who've been with our organization for decades. Is there anything that you would like to say directly to that wide range of membership, particularly as it relates to why they should stay involved?
Well, I think we ought to remember, and this is me included, that we stand on the shoulders of giants, and it wasn't that long ago that we were really excluded from the arenas that we're now participating in. And it's still difficult. I mean, for Asian American women lawyers, for example, I think the road to equality is certainly still not there. For Asian Americans, male or female, it's still not an equal playing field. So there's more to be done. But in furthering our own careers, I hope we don't forget where we came from and the sacrifices that others have made to be a door opener for us. And so I think it means that we have to be a door opener for others. We don't want to be those who, now that we have achieved our comfortable life, that we pull up the ladder for everybody else. That's not what the country is about. And when it becomes that, if it becomes that way, and it's on the verge of doing that in many areas, the country is going to be smaller. It's not going to be the land of opportunity that it's always been, and it's going to be weaker. And so I really would like Asian American younger lawyers to realize that they actually have a role in that. You know, they can speak to that. And I'm a firm believer that even a small number of people who are competent and form a critical mass, right time, right place, can make a huge difference. And like I said, if it wasn't for literally a handful of people 42 years ago, AABA would not be here. But that's true for so many. If you look back on any social change, it starts really small. It starts at a very modest level, and then it spreads, and there's a cultural shift. And so Asian Americans, yes, we should raise our families. We should have successful careers. We should enjoy life. But we also need to participate in that dynamic process. We need to be part of this community, and we need to have our voices heard.
Thank you, Don.
If you enjoyed this video, please click like. If you'd like to see future videos like this, please click subscribe.